on the nematodes mostly, with life cycles, parasitic life cycles, etc. And then the Metamorpha and Rotifera probably would just be at one station each. They ask you one question about, three or four questions about just one specimen. So those are kind of an afterthought here. Okay, what is a pseudocoelom? Would be the question next. It means a false cavity around the digestive tract. So what we have here that's an important feature that all three of these phyla have, and we'll go ahead and focus in on the phylum Nematoda. Nematoda. These have a complete gut tract, complete gastrointestinal tract. Complete gastrointestinal tract. So this is the first observation of a mouth, a gut tube to an anus. But the main thing is digestive tract is not lined with mesoderm. It's only endoderm. There then is a body cavity that surrounds that gut tract. It's like a circulatory cavity called a pseudocoelom. And then the mesoderm only occurs on the outside wall of that cavity. And then the ectoderm on the outside. So I'll draw this when we draw our specimens, and I'll show you how I'd ask about the pseudocoelom. But this is kind of an interesting body plan that these three groups all have. After today, everything else is going to be a true coelom, which has a mesodermally aligned gut tract. So anyway, why do we care? Pseudocoelom acts as a circulatory system separate from the gut. Remember with the gastrovascular cavity, it was a gut that also was responsible for distributing the food around the body. Here, the gut does digestion and absorption, and then those nutrients are passed to the pseudocoelom cavity, and then the circulation can happen independent of digestion. So it's kind of like a feature. It's also useful as a hydrostatic skeleton, an organ storage area, multiple features. So it's kind of a really interesting adaptation to separate your digestion from your circulation storage there. Okay? So, Nematoda, roundworms. So many of these are parasites, and the one on the left is basically like these ascarid worms. These are worms that were taken from a horse. So horses can get worm colic. What happens is if you don't worm your horse, they can get these piled up in their stomach. Basically, they won't pass through their digestion. They block their digestion. And what a vet will do is cut the horse open, cut their stomach open, and use a garden hose to spray the worms out. So these came from a vet, and those were horse worms. But the term vermicelli, which is a type of pasta noodle, isn't vermicelli like one size smaller than spaghetti? And then angel hair is the thinnest of pasta, noodle pastas. Vermicelli, the name literally comes from worm. And this is basically a pile of roundworms that were removed from a person. So you can see that it kind of looks like pasta noodles with holes there. But anyway, the nematodes basically have this tube within a tube body plan. There's a complete gastrointestinal tract. We have a pseudocoelom. The other feature that the nematodes have is a unique feature to them and to the arthropods is they have a cuticle on the outside. So I'll identify each of these things kind of in the drawings as we go. But how do you describe the nematode? It's basically like a tube on the outside, and there's a tube on the inside, which is the gut tract. And that's sort of like the best way to describe the nematode body plan. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to list some specimens out that you potentially could see. But the main question for classification is these are all nematodes. But for each one of these nematodes, I probably will ask you, like, if it's a parasite, where does it live and how do you get it? Right? It's kind of the main thing. And so Ascaris, which is the main intestinal parasite that occurs in mammals, and also occurs in reptiles and other organisms as well. But Ascaris is a real common one. And in fact, it's common in humans as well. Check this one out. So my first year here in 1998, I get a package from a local pathology laboratory. I'm not sure why they gave it to me. But anyway, they said, can you identify this worm that was found in someone's toilet after they went to the bathroom? But it's been cleaned with formaldehyde. But anyway, the person looked down and they found that in their toilet. So it's a pretty significant sized worm. And so I wrote them this. This is my reply to them. I put it out in the letter here. I go, this sample contains one female nematode, most likely Ascaris lumbricoides. That's what this is. A common intestinal parasite in pigs that also infects humans. They can also infect bears and dogs and things like that. But this is the primary host is pigs and humans. I said the parasite is ingested as an egg from contaminated food or from eating manure. So usually where people get it is like unwashed garden vegetables that have been fertilized with like baby manure or people manure. Called night soil. You ever heard of night soil? Night soil is in some countries like some poor countries, fertilizers are expensive. Poop is free. So what people do is they'll poop in a bucket or out in their garden and then chill their own feces into their garden for fertilizer. And that's one way these parasites get transmitted. So anyway, the eggs are small, the 1 millimeter, so they're easily missed. The eggs are ingested and they hatch in your stomach. Your stomach acids kind of eat the cuticle away, and the egg hatches. And then the larvae in your small intestine burrows through the small intestine wall and makes its way through your circulatory system to your liver. From the liver, they end up getting into your lungs. They migrate through your liver into your lungs. And then what happens oftentimes with Ascaris especially is the larvae will migrate from the lungs back up into your throat, through your trachea. And what this causes is like a cough, it's called a worm cough. And if you have livestock like goats or sheep or horses with worm colic or with worms will often have a chronic cough. And what they're doing is they're coughing up these small worm larvae. One thing you can do is you can look in like a water tank or a guzzler, and if you see little thread-like worms in the water tank, you know your animal has worms. Anyway, the worms are coughed up from the lungs, the little larval ones. They're like thread-like, they're like maybe a couple centimeters long. And then they're re-swallowed. You swallow them again. So then back in your intestines, you end up with the adult roundworm, and there's a male and a female. I'm not going to ask you to differentiate male and female, but you can usually tell the male because they have kind of like a candy cane like hook on the posterior fin. The female gonopore is somewhere around here. The male basically takes this hook and hooks it around the female to reproduce, and that's how they do it. Anyway, the whole life cycle is called the migrants, the larval migrants. The migration of the larvae to the body can take like upwards of 2 months. And interestingly enough, it's like it causes pain. People who have worm infections have they have belly aches or abdominal pains, but it doesn't kill you. So there's enough of a coadaptation that the worms can migrate around you without killing you. But it definitely makes you sick. So complications that arise in livestock are intestinal blockage. Obviously, all the migrants can cause inflammation and kind of illness and belly aches. But overall, it's not fatal. In some countries of the world, as many as half the people have worm infections. Like India and Africa, you could expect that half the population has these worm parasites. This isn't so common in the U.S. anymore. this was kind of a weird example where someone, in America or Europe would have a worm infection, but they probably, got it from Okay, so I'll likely have, maybe a scarets on there. The questions I'd ask you about these, let's see, I'll write this story. Scarets. This is the roundworm intestinal parasite. So how you get it is you ingest the egg. Where it lives is it basically lives in your intestine. These worms are one reason. So there's always kind of, I guess you'd call folklore or wives' tales regarding, human health. But if you've ever heard the phrase, like if someone has puppies are born, there's kind of like a general thing of like, don't let puppies lick your face, right? Like, if you have puppies, they're so cute, I know you want to kiss them. Puppies licking your face, they can actually transfer roundworms. How dogs transfer roundworms is when the worms are in the stage where they're coughing them up, the worms are in their mouth. And when dogs kind of mouth each other, lick each other on the mouth, they can actually transfer worms across from dog to dog. So I remember, one time, in the Bay Area, someone, having their kid look at a dog, and this woman ran up and said, no, never let a dog lick your face. She looked like she was from India. But, it's a concern that if you have dogs or cats or livestock or whatever, you can actually get worms transferred from mouth to mouth. So don't kiss your face. So anyway, we're not going to do a worm dissection on this lab or whatever, but basically inside, this is the tube within a tube. If you cut these open, what you find is inside there's a bunch of gonads present, but the digestive tract basically is kind of like really thin strap-like tube. I will have, though, a cross-section of a scarus. So on this slide, there's a cross-section of a scarus. Let's go ahead and show what that looks like. In cross-section. So what we have going on for the overall body shape is we have a tube like this. Okay, so there's kind of the scarus worm kind of outer. This would be the ectoderm layer. And then the endoderm, usually there's a pharynx, which is like a muscular mouth pocket. But for the most part, the gut tract is a thin ribbon-like tube. And this is the endoderm. And this is the gastrointestinal tract. So the gastrointestinal tract is entirely made of endoderm. It's kind of the main theme here. And then the mesoderm, which is mostly muscle, is lining the outside of the body cavity. This is our mesoderm. Alright, so here is our mesoderm. And so this cavity here, this is what is called the pseudocoelom. And the reason why it is a pseudocoelom and not a true coelom is there's only mesoderm on one side of it, on the outside. The gut is entirely endoderm. There's no mesoderm at all. That's the definition of a pseudocoelom. If I took a cross section of this, so we take a cross section like this and draw it, we'll do something like this. So here's our ectoderm. Here is our endoderm. The gut is actually kind of flat. There's kind of like what looks like a flat strap. This is our endoderm. And we can shorten this to be like a G. gastrointestinal tract. And then the mesoderm is lining only the outside cavity. Like so. All right, and then again on that slide that I have here, this cavity is called a pseudocoelom. There are other stuff in there. The one shown here is a female because it has two big, large uterus structures with eggs in them, and then oviducts and ovaries. I don't think it's really worth doing all that. But anyway, this stuff in here basically is gonads, and you can tell the females because there's two uterus structures. The males only have one, but I think the slides here will have a male and a female basically on the same slide. So here's what you have, something like this. You have these oviducts and ovaries. But I would just go ahead and let's just go ahead and say these are essentially gonads inside that pseudocoelom. The main purpose there is to say that this is not only a circulatory function. It's for storage of reproductive organs, and it's for movement sometimes too, for water pressure and stuff there. That's a cross section to look at. So I guess for Ascaris we have, the whole specimen asking you about how you're infected, and we have the image showing what a pseudocoelom is. Okay, sound good? Ascaris, probably a slide of the cross section like this, with a pointer in there asking you about the gut tract, the pseudocoelom, etc. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention. This cuticle business. Cuticle is important. It's an important feature of the nematodes. It's what protects them from your immune system and from your stomach acid. The cuticle is kind of this protective barrier. They effectively have like a rubber raincoat surrounding them. It's a protein cuticle. It's kind of elastic. And kind of acts like a rubber band in a way. This cuticle surrounds the whole organism. You can oftentimes see it in the cross-section slide. Okay, so here's our cuticle. Here's our cuticle. Anyway, so how it works for the nematode is the cuticle is kind of like plasticky or rubbery. And what they do is they have longitudinal muscles in their body that when they contract, the organism bends one way, and when it contracts the other side, the organism bends that way. So you can kind of tell nematodes because they have this kind of whip-like when they swim or when they move. Their body doesn't shorten, it just bends. The cuticle kind of operates like a rubber exoskeleton. And it's thought that the cuticle probably is homologous to the cuticle found in arthropods as well. We'll mention that when we see arthropods. So the cuticle is an important feature of the nematodes in the metamorpha for the ability to live in pretty much any habitat. Okay, so intestinal roundworms. This is basically a small intestine here full of roundworms on a section. And this is the Center for Disease Control. Ingesting eggs, and the parasite lives in your small intestine, basically, is the main thing. Okay, hookworm. Oh, actually, let's skip that one. We're going to go to this one first. The next one we're going to look at is Enterobius. So we say Ascaris is intestinal worm. Enterobius, these are intestinal worms, but more accurately they're called pinworms. And so pinworms are Enterobius. So I would like you to know the common name of these parasites. because it also tells you kind of a little bit about how you get them. So pinworms are a common parasite in children, even in Shasta County and the Redding area. So here's another specimen I got from Northern Diagnostics Laboratory in this little vial. The tape is on here so it doesn't roll off the tabletop. So this, you look in here and you can see these little, maybe 1 centimeter long worms. And here's my letter back to them about this. The sample you sent contains 3 adult female pinworms, Enterobius vermicularis. The identification is based on size, and this is the most common nematode parasite in humans in North America. It's assumed that maybe 1 in 5 school children, like in Shasta County, will probably get pinworms at some point in time. So how it happens is the child ingests the eggs, usually intestinal parasites. It's an egg ingestion infection. So the child ingests the eggs. How they ingest the eggs is like their little friends' toys or a blanket or whatever. They're putting their hands in their mouth. They ingest the eggs in some way. I'll kind of explain further in a second. The worm eggs get in the stomach, the worms hatch. The worms then end up in the large intestine, in the colon. And right at the very, very end of the colon is where the kind of worms hang out. So late at night when the child's asleep, the worms, especially the females, will emerge from the intestine, from the rectum, and lay eggs around the perianum, which is, kind of like the region around the rear end of the intestine. This worm activity in your rear end, is itchy, right? It's kind of uncomfortable. So what will happen is children will scratch themselves. They'll scratch their rear ends, and then proceed to put their hands back on the mouth, right? So what happens is you get the eggs under your fingernails or on your hands from scratching your rear end, and then you put your hand back in your mouth. So the mode of infection, you'll never forget this. Scratch your bum, suck your thumb. Right? So anyway, the way to prevent pinworm infection is to make children wear underwear to bed. So that way when they scratch themselves, they're not scratching directly on where the eggs are laid. The other way to get rid of pinworms is the Scotch tape method. And you learn this from grandparents, is when you go to change the children's diaper or whatever, you take some Scotch tape, hold it backwards, and you basically pull the eggs off with Scotch tape from around the anus. And then there is this device. If you go to the doctor and you think your child might have pinworms, they give you this little sampling device. This is like a little plastic paddle that has sticky glue on the outside. And the idea is when you're, what do you call it, investigating why your kid's so itchy and wiggly, you would basically take this and stick it on the child's rear end, and it will collect not only worm eggs, but maybe even some female worms that are sticking out. And then you put this in, they send it to a diagnostic laboratory to verify that you have child nephrology. So it's pretty easy to treat because, again, wearing underwear to bed prevents the cycle, and the parasite basically dies out. Also, it's easy to treat with ivermectin. Ivermectin is a drug that was invented in like the 60s and 70s. And what ivermectin does is it interferes with cuticle formation. And if the cuticle can't form, your immune system can attack and kill the worm. And that's where the ivermectin came from. And so anyway, when you worm your dog, or when you worm your livestock, horses and sheep, etc., essentially it's some form of ivermectin that works like that. Okay? But again, like I said, 1 in 5 school children in Redding probably at some point in time will get that. And it's, there you go. Scratch your bum, suck your thumb. That's your pathway, right? So don't forget that one. Let's see here. Oops. Okay, so another intestinal parasite. This one actually is not acquired by eating it. It's acquired by other means here. Let me go ahead and write this one out. This is Necator. Necator is called a hookworm. green here for the name. Necator is a hookworm. And these are called hookworms because if you look at them under an electron microscope or a very, very powerful microscope, you can see their mouth has these sharp fangs on them. And these hooks are used to embed themselves and latch into your intestinal wall. So where they live ultimately as adults is in your small intestine, burrowed and basically biting into your intestinal wall. These are little vampires. They're sucking the blood out of your intestine. The pinworms and the intestinal worms are eating the food that you eat. They're basically eating your food as it's passing through, kind of like a tapeworm does. These are different. They actually drink your blood from inside your body wall. And but how you get hookworms is by walking through contaminated soil. So here is an example. You probably heard the folklore thing of never walk through a pasture barefoot, or never walk through a livestock area, or a field barefoot. And it's not because you're stepping on a nail or something. It's that you can get hookworms from livestock feces, basically. What happens is you're walking through the soil, the larval worms will get onto your foot and then drill into your foot and then migrate through your subdermis, like your lymphatic system, all the way up into your body. They go through a migrant that they go on through your lungs, liver and lungs, and get popped up like the other ones do. But when they end up back in your intestine, they're basically sucking the blood out of your intestine. So hookworms, again, can infect humans, dogs, cats, etc. I knew someone who got hookworms in Hawaii. They were walking on a beach barefoot. You think, oh, walking on a beach barefoot in Hawaii. But the problem is raw sewage sometimes ends up on the beach in some areas of Hawaii. Or if you have dogs pooping on the beach, hookworm larvae can occur in those areas. So it's a really interesting story. I have these two links here. You really need to go check these out. NPR recently had a couple articles on hookworms. Hookworms have been investigated as a mechanism for curing allergies. Check this out. This is a weird story. So there is a fellow, I think he's from Santa Cruz, who had chronic allergies. Maybe you do, or maybe you know someone who has chronic allergies. In springtime, when the pollen comes out, you just are incapacitated, right? Your eyes swell up, your sinuses get swelled up, you feel sick. It's basically a real hypersensitivity to allergens that some people have. So anyway, this person, who I think was a scientist, was kind of marveling in his travels that, when you go to America and Europe, or, first world countries, people have these allergy problems, like, sneezing and pollen allergy problems. But when you go to places like Africa or South America, in rural villages, no one has allergies. So what's going on? And so anyway, the idea came up that people who would live in rural areas, kind of more primitive living conditions, have a higher worm parasite infection. And there might be some relationship with that. So what he did, this is from the article, if you listen to it, the story, he went to Africa, the Ivory Coast of Africa, went to like a rural village. He went to the people in the village and said, "Where do you guys go to the bathroom?" And they pointed to some trees over at the kind of edge of the field. And so he went over to the area where everyone pooped, basically like a latrine tree, and took his shoes off and walked around. And then within a day or two, he saw that he had been infected by hookworm in his feet. And then he got back on a plane and flew back to the US. In a week's time, his allergies were gone, according to his story. And the mechanism here is that these hookworms basically have to somehow overcome your immune system. So like, in order for those hookworms to migrate your body and to live in your body, they have to fight your immune system off so they don't get killed. And what they've done is the worms excrete like an antihistamine protein that prevents your immune system from attacking them. And the theory is that humans, had basically evolved or had co-occurred with parasitic worms for potentially millions of years. I mean, potentially, humans have been around for 1.5 million or so years as humans, and essentially all the primates have hookworms or some sort of worm parasites. It's that essentially our immune system has kind of evolved in response to the worm load, such that when you eliminate the worms from your body, some people generate a hypersensitivity to allergic contact. So anyway, it's interesting. So to further the story, this guy thought it was so great that he thought maybe he would sell hookworm treatment online or in magazines or whatever. So what he would do is he would collect his own feces, collect his own poop, and he'd put the poop in like a wet sandbox, and the little larval worms would migrate away from the poop, and then he would scoop it up in a little vial, excuse me, and then he would sell it online or in magazines. That it's basically an allergy treatment that you take the vial and you put it on your foot, and then the worm larvae will migrate in, and then you'll get your allergies treated. Anyway, the FDA apparently came after him, and so he fled to the Caribbean because he was basically being charged with selling alternative medical treatments without a license. But anyway, it's really interesting. It's all happened within the last 10 years of using hookworms as an anti-allergy treatment. What do you have to know? So we have Necator americanus on slides here. The Necator that you're seeing on these slides, it just kind of looks like this. It looks like a little worm on the slide, so you can't see the little hooks on there. But if I have it on a test, the label that says Necator will be visible, so you'll know it's Necator, it's a hookworm. I also have this one. This is a ankylostoma. An ankylostoma is a hookworm that occurs like in cats, and humans can get it. So you can get that if you walk in areas where cats or whatever. But basically, these are both examples of hookworms. This is a much larger one. You can see it there. But on the exam, I'll probably have the Necator on a slide, and you'll have to basically say it causes hookworm. How do you get the disease? Tiptoe through the tulips, right? If you walk barefoot in a pasture, they drill into your foot. And they basically live in your intestine as an adult. Is that good? Okay, hookworms, fun. All right, then on to trichinosis. So trichinella is these are trichinella. Causes the disease trichinosis. So I know the words are very similar. Trichinosis is the worm disease. Trichinella is the worm. You get this one by eating raw or undercooked meat that's infected. So where you usually find this is bear meat and pig meat has the highest kind of risk of getting trichinosis. So if you hunt bear and you smoke the meat, which doesn't really cook it to a full temperature, or if you make a dish with the bear meat that ends up with raw or uncooked inside, you can get trichinosis. Also, wild pig can have trichinosis as well. So anyway, what's going on here with this one is this is muscle tissue, and I'll kind of draw it here. But these little spiral things are essentially it's a cyst in the muscle that has the worm in it. But what you're seeing with trichinosis is here's the muscle tissue going like this. Muscle tissue is very fibrous, and what you're seeing basically is something like fibrous muscle, and you'll see these little pockets. And then in the pocket, you're going to see basically a worm. So you get the worm by ingesting uncooked meat, and then the larvae migrates through your intestine into your circulatory system, and then it ends up in your muscle, and these embed themselves as muscles and cysts in your muscles. The big risk, so what it causes basically is muscle fatigue, muscle soreness. But the big risk is if you have a high enough load, they'll end up in your heart muscle, and that'll cause cardiac arrest and die. I did have a couple students in my 26 years here who were bear hunters and had trichinosis. They were treated, but they basically have chronic muscle pain. They were, their muscles are always sore. You can imagine with these cysts, basically, you can get rid of the worm, but you basically have a kind of a forever scar. So anyway, clearly cooked your wild game trichinella. So on this one, I have a slide here. This slide tray has two different slide versions. One is the trichinella in the muscle. That's the pink slide image in here. The other one is trichinella, just the worm by itself. And that looks just like the gator, looks just like intravious. You can't really tell it's trichinella that. So the one on the test will be the muscle tissue, for sure. And I'll basically ask you, how do you get the disease? Undercooked or raw pig or bear meat. It's kind of the most common way to get it. But it occurs in many kinds of animals. Questions? Look good? Okay. All right. Okay, so the last remaining group, I'm just going to go ahead and call, well, what I have here as an example is I have heartworm. So heartworm, actually, let me go ahead and change this. The general classification of these worms are called filarial. Filarial worms basically are worms that live in your circulatory system. And you have two circulatory systems. You have your arteries and veins, and you also have a lymphatic system, which is kind of like your secondary fluid system in your body. So the one I have here that is in the arteries and veins is the dog heartworm. I got this from a vet. I think this is like a German Shepherd heart. And what you can see, it's a heart that's been sectioned lengthwise, and spilling out of it are all these little thread-like worms. So the dog heartworm is a parasite of dogs and cats. And the vector for the dog heartworm, the organism that transmits it, is the tree hole mosquito. So this is a mosquito, tree hole mosquito. This is a mosquito that specifically lives like in blue oaks, which are the oaks that surround Chapman College campus. When the limb breaks off, like in the winter snow or whatever, there'll be like a pocket in the tree. And in the spring, when that fills with water from the rain, these tree hole mosquitoes kind of breed in that habitat. The tree hole mosquitoes pick up the heartworm from wild canines. So coyote and fox will have heartworm. It's a pretty high load in Shasta County. And then when that mosquito then goes and bites your dog or cat, it can transmit heartworm to your dog or cat. Cats can get heartworm, but the heartworm doesn't reproduce effectively in the cat. So the cat's like a dead end host. I mean, it'll hurt the cat, it'll kill the cat if it gets a heavy load. But if a mosquito bites a cat, the mosquito won't get heartworm. But the dog can have the more complete life cycle, whereby the heartworm reproduces if a mosquito bites and infects the dog, it can transmit other dogs. But ultimately what happens is it takes usually 4 or 5 years, but the worms accumulate in such an amount that they plug up the heart system valves, and the dog dies of circulatory failure, basically. So most people who have dogs have them on some sort of a prophylactic ivermectin pill. They give them a monthly tablet, and that basically gets rid of the heartworm infection and infection. Gotcha. Questions? Look good? Yeah? No? Okay. There are other examples of filarial worms that infect humans. I don't have any specimens of these, but if you've ever heard of elephantiasis, this was a common disease like in the 1700s and 1800s during exploration of the tropics. So elephantiasis was fairly common in Africa and the South Pacific, and it's transmitted also by a mosquito. The same mosquito that transmits yellow fever can transmit elephantiasis. Well, what happens here is the worms live in your lymphatic system, and you have lymph nodes in your pelvis and under your armpits. And so the worm plug up your lymph nodes, and so the lymphatic fluid gets to your limbs, but it can't circulate back up. And so elephantiasis was a major issue. Again, ivermectin has been kind of a miracle drug in terms of how to fix lymph infection. The guinea worm occurs in areas of Africa. These live in your lymphatic system. These are spooky. The vector in this one is a water flea. So you get this one by drinking contaminated water. You accidentally ingest this little microcrustacean, the water flea. I think some of you saw water fleas with the serratium, the little benaflagellate algae. Those are water fleas. Anyway, the ones that occur in Africa are carrying this worm parasite. So you ingest it, the worm gets in your circulatory system, but then it basically ends up in your limbs, like usually in your feet. And the water flea has to the worm has to basically lay its eggs back in the water. So what it'll do is it'll pop out and it'll burrow its way out of your skin and stick its little worm head out. And in addition to being freaky, like having a worm sticking out of your foot, it's super painful. So the story has it, this is like excruciating pain when the worm emerges from your skin. And so what people will do is they'll go, oh shoot, I got a worm sticking out, it's painful. They'll go down to the local river or pond or whatever and try to wash their foot. And that's how the worm basically gets its eggs back in the water. Anyway, the method to get rid of these guinea worms is to, when the worm sticks its head out, is to wrap the worm around a stick. And this process takes like a couple days. So what you got to do is wrap the head of the worm around the stick, and then more of the worm will come out. When you wrap more of it out, and more will come out. And it's progressively, you got to wrap the thing out. The guinea worm's like about a foot, or a foot long. So apparently it's an excruciatingly painful process that, but that's really the only way to kind of get rid of it unless you use ivermectin to get rid of it. I think it's safer like that because what is you remove the worm out. With ivermectin, the worm dies and your immune system has to process it, right? Anyway, the story here is this little symbol here called the rod of Cephalopus. The rod of Cephalopus is what you see on like ambulances. It's kind of like the universal symbol of like emergency medical technicians, emergency medical treatment. The rod of Cephalopus usually is referred to snakes around a stick, but this is the ancient Greek version of it, and the story is it's probably indicator of one of the first medical treatments documented. Like, there are hieroglyphics in Egypt showing this treatment of pulling a worm out with a stick. And so it's likely this symbol that we use on ambulances for emergency medical treatment goes all the way back to the process of wrapping a guinea worm around a stick and pulling it out slowly. And this is an image of from ancient hieroglyphics, etc. of the same process. So it's not a snake, it's probably a worm. So I don't have any guinea worms, I don't have elephantiasis, but I do have a heartworm. And so you will have to know that this is a nematode. It's transmitted by a mosquito. You don't have to tell me treat a mosquito, but basically it's a filarial worm parasite of dogs and cats. We good? Okay. All right. So that's all of our nematodes here. The phylum Nematomorpha is a related phylum. They have all the same features as the nematode. What they don't have, though, is they don't have a complete gut tract. The adult Nematomorpha doesn't eat. It has no gut tract. It lives off of the fat stores it generated while it's in the larval stage. The phylum Nematomorpha. Nematomorpha. These are commonly called horsehair worms or Gordian worms. Both names are commonly used. So a horsehair worm, that name is, I think it's like an American thing. That in the 1600s and 1700s and 1800s, people got around by basically horses on muddy roads. And what you see, and you can still see this today, these things reproduce in the water. You'll see a mud puddle, and you'll see one of these thread-like worms. Here's basically a horsehair worm that was found locally. It's like, it's like a foot-long little thread-like worm in a puddle, and they're kind of writhing around looking for a mate or looking for somewhere to lay their eggs. The legend or folklore was that if a horse's tail hair comes off or falls off the horse and lands in a puddle of water, it will turn into a worm. This was, of course, before Pasteur, right? Remember I said Pasteur in the 1860s, 1850s demonstrated that life doesn't originate from non-living stuff. That was kind of like this thing Darwin used to argue that life, species generate from previous species. So spontaneous generation, that kind of stuff was sort of addressed and falsified in the mid-1800s. But this horsehair worm is a holdover from the whole idea that a horsehair that falls, horsetail hair that falls into a puddle can become a living worm. That's where the name of this thing comes from. The parasite life cycle is that they are all parasites of insects or arthropods, mostly insects. So there is a grasshopper with a horsehair worm flowing out of its intestine. This is a Jerusalem cricket, or sometimes called potato bug. And these are found locally that have that. You can also find praying mantises that have these worms in them. So what happens, it's really weird, the cricket or the Jerusalem cricket or the mantis will ingest the worm egg or larvae from its food. The worm basically hatches and grows in the abdomen of the insect. And what it does is it selectively eats the gonads and non-essential structures so that the insect is alive for a while. The insect will live for most of the year. And then when the worm is ready to reproduce, it does this weird thing. Like I mentioned, the parasite that from the cat poop that causes the mice to think that cat urine is a sex pheromone. Many parasites will change the behavior of their host. So these worms somehow trigger a thirst response in the insect. So what will happen is the insect, like this little Jerusalem cricket, which is a burrowing insect, will suddenly get incredibly thirsty. So if you see a Jerusalem cricket walking around, these are normally burrowing or in your soil insects. If they're walking around, they probably have this worm parasite. And what they're doing is they're looking for water supply. So the cricket will go to a creek or a pond or a puddle in the water, puddle of water on the ground, and start drinking. And the worm senses that the cricket is drinking water and it explodes out of the abdomen like aliens or something. It just basically pops out, killing the cricket, obviously. But the worm then knows it's the water, and that's how they get there. The other name for these worms is called the Gordian worm. It's the same worm, but the Gordian worm is from Greek mythology. This is probably more the European name for the worm. The idea in Greek mythology is the Gordian knot. I believe the story is the king of Persia, kind of a biblical story or like an ancient story. The king of Persia had this knot that was like a rope knot that was an unsolvable puzzle. It was a knot that supposedly the person who could untie the knot would rule the world. So the story is Alexander the Great. The great what do you call it? Alexander the Great. I think he was a Greek conqueror or whatever. Showed up, said, "Oh yeah, show me that knot," and he took a sword and cut it in half and said, "Knot's undone, I rule the world." But anyway, the Gordian knot is the story there that is an untiable knot. Oftentimes you find these kind of coiled up and tied in this weird little knot here. So that's where the name Gordian worm comes from. So on the exam, I'll probably ask you, well, for one, I said that the phylum Metamorpha has everything that the nematodes have. It has a pseudocoelom and it has a cuticle, but it does not have a complete gut tract. So no gut. So the adults don't feed. They feed when they're the parasite stage by absorbing nutrients from their body. And these are all insect parasites. So what happens is they infect insects, and then they get back into the water by making the insect thirsty. And it goes and releases the worm. Got it? So I only have one specimen, a couple specimens, so you'll see one station maybe, and I'll ask you what the phylum name is. I'll ask you maybe what phylum it's closely related to, and why it's not the same. And I think the main reason why they're not classified as nematodes is because they don't have their complete gut tract. And then I might ask you one of the common names, either one, horsehair worm or Gordian worm is fine. Okay, finally, this is a very different organism called a rotifer. The phylum Rotifera. These are cool because they are considered the smallest animal type known. So the phylum Rotifera, these are actually smaller than many protists. I think it's smaller than Stentor. You know, Stentor was that ciliate protist that we had. And it kind of looks like Stentor. But the main difference here is in the phylum Rotifera, rotifers, they have this like double ciliated crown. And the body is kind of segmented. Kind of have like a worm-like look. There's kind of a rotifer here. And the main thing is this is called a ciliated corona, which corona is just Latin for crown. So they have this paired ciliated disc at the end of their body, and then what happens, the mouth is located here. So they use that ciliated disc for locomotion, and then they have a complete gut tract. But the main thing to note is the reason why we're mentioning these today is the gut is entirely endoderm. It's entirely endoderm. The mesoderm only lying on the outside, so they have a pseudocoelom. But they're kind of cool. I think the main thing, I have a slide here with some rotifers on it, and I'd ask you the phylum name. I'd ask you about what their locomotion structure is, the ciliated corona, and I probably would ask you about their body cavity. So note that this is a pseudocoelom. You can't really tell looking at it that it's a pseudocoelom, but you should just note the reason why they're classified with the Nematomorpha and Nematoda is the endoderm. The gut is entirely endoderm. There's no mesoderm on it. But they're kind of unique, cool animals. They're the smallest animal type, and they're less than a millimeter. So I have probably one station will have a slide of a rotifer on there. I'll ask you the phylum name. I'll ask you about the cilia, locomotion, and the pseudocoelom. One thing to note I forgot to mention with nematodes and Nematomorpha, they have no ciliated cells. So the nematodes and Nematomorpha lack cilia completely, and they have this cuticle. Interestingly, I'll mention this again later, is arthropods have the same traits. Arthropods have no ciliated cells and they have a cuticle. So it's thought that the nematodes and Nematomorpha are probably most closely related to arthropods. It's like arthropods and nematodes are probably come from the same origins in some ways. Okay, so I think that gets us today. So almost an hour there, blabbing. So what to look at? Ascaris. We have our whole specimen, and you can look at the bottom here. Careful, this is formaldehyde here that these are stored in. So maybe if you want to look at this one, you can look at it from the bottom rather than opening that up. So you should look at the Ascaris. So I'll probably ask you. You'll know it's Ascaris, it's labeled, whatever. But I'll ask you how you get infected and where it lives. You eat the eggs. It's in your intestines. Pinworms. Scratch your bum, suck your thumb, it lives in your intestine. Hookworms, tiptoe the tulips, and it basically drools in your foot. Infect you that way, it lives in your intestine. Trichinella, you ingest undercooked or uncooked bear or pig meat, and it lives in your muscles. And then filarial worms, usually these are transmitted by mosquito vector. we'll just go ahead and say mosquitoes.
It lives in your muscles, in your
Malarial worms.
brain.
And it lives in your circulatory system, whether it's your arteries, veins, or your lymphatic, kind of thing there. Cross section of our Ascaris. Likely what I do is I have this on there, and I ask you about the pseudocoelom. I ask you about the endoderm gut. Identify the gut and note that it's endoderm, and that the idea that the mesoderm lines only the outside of the body. Those are three good questions for the cross section. I have trichinella, so make sure that you look at those because I'll have those on there. And you have to know that's trichinella parasite
For no reason.
causes the muscle section. Then I have these Nematoporpha, horsehair worms, and Gordian worms, and then I have a slide of rovers. So yeah, that's not too much to look at today. Good stuff. Okay, there you go. Have at it. And I think all the specimens are out. There's only a few slides to look at.